You know that feeling, right? When things quiet down, just for a second, and there's this little nagging question, is this it? Is this really, me?
Yeah, that subtle hum beneath the surface. That sense there might be something more, something deeper than just the daily grind.
Exactly. It makes you wonder, what's actually shaping the way we think and the choices we make.
Often without us even consciously realizing it.
So that's what we're diving into today. This idea that there's maybe a kind of illusion, an unseen framework in modern life that guides us.
Right. Not like a sinister plot, but more like the subtle architecture of our environment. We want to just step back and, well, look at the state itself.
An invitation to peek behind the curtain, maybe?
Precisely. To understand the forces at play.
Okay, let's start with something concrete. Choice. We feel like we have so much of it. Think about, the supermarket cereal aisle.
Oh, yeah. Walls and walls of boxes. It feels like the peak of consumer freedom, doesn't it? So many options.
But were those choices really freely determined? I mean, by us?
That's the interesting question. You have the freedom to pick between, 50 kinds of sugary flakes. But the fact you're standing there, considering processed cereal as a primary breakfast option.
That choice was kind of made for you. Or at least heavily influenced.
Exactly. It exists within a system geared towards profit, convenience, mass production. You're choosing within predefined parameters. It's a very convincing simulation of freedom, maybe.
A simulacrum. Wow. So the feeling of agency is there, choosing the specific box.
Right. But the fundamental structure, the menu itself, often goes unquestioned. The key thing is, more choice doesn't automatically mean more real freedom.
And this goes way beyond cereal, I assume.
Oh, absolutely. Pick careers. We're told you can be anything, which sounds incredibly liberating.
Right.
But that encouragement often operates within the boundaries of what the current economic system values. Be a coder, be a lawyer, be an engineer.
Right. Things that generate clear economic value.
Right. But try being, say, a full-time poet without finding some way to monetize it within that system. It's possible, but the path isn't exactly paved, is it?
The system subtly encourages paths that are, well, profitable or self-sustaining according to its rules.
It channels expression. And what about education? We're taught critical thinking.
Which is vital, of course.
Absolutely essential. But critical thinking often has its own invisible fences, questioning the fundamental assumptions about, say, economic growth or consumerism.
Uh-oh. Careful now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those questions might get gently steered towards more practical or realistic considerations. Think critically, but maybe not too critically about the foundation.
And the digital world. Social media promised this democratization of voice.
Yeah, a platform for everyone. But then you have the algorithms. They're not neutral curators.
They prioritize certain things.
Definitely. Things that grab attention, often sensationalism, conformity to trends, things that align with dominant narratives. A deep, nuanced piece might sink without a trace.
While something provocative but maybe shallow goes viral.
Precisely. It encourages a kind of algorithmic performance. Rather than pure, authentic expression getting the most reach, you start tailoring your voice, consciously or not.
And even rebellion gets packaged, right? Counterculture movements.
Can become brand identities, sold back to us with the right aesthetics. It starts feeling less like a challenge to power and more like another marketing campaign.
It's kind of ingenious in a way. It's not overt control.
No, that's the brilliance. It works through offering rewards, validation, the feeling of choice, enough surface-level agency that we don't often question the deeper structures.
We feel free because we can choose between Netflix and Hulu or this job and that job.
While the underlying rules of the game remain largely invisible or just accepted as the way things are.
And the more we internalize those rules, the less external control is even needed. We self-regulate.
We genuinely believe our choices are entirely our own, even as we operate within these carefully constructed, often beneficial but still limiting parameters.
Okay, so that's the architecture of choice. Let's shift to something equally pervasive. This relentless drive for productivity.
Yes. The feeling that we should always be doing something, optimizing, achieving.
That morning ritual, right? Wake up, grab the phone, instantly plugged into emails, news, maybe even motivational content telling us how to squeeze more out of the day.
There's often this low-grade anxiety, isn't there? A feeling of being perpetually behind before you've even properly started.
It's the productivity trap. Our value feels increasingly tied to our output.
The fundamental shift, really, from human beings to human doings. Our intrinsic worth gets overshadowed by our instrumental value, what we can produce, how
Yeah.
efficient we are.
Where did this come from? It feels so ingrained now.
Well, you can trace a line, arguably, from things like the Protestant work ethic through the demands of industrialization right up to modern digital capitalism, which quantifies and gamifies almost everything.
So idleness isn't just unproductive. It feels almost morally suspect.
It can, yeah. And look at the explosion of metrics, our sacred metrics. Steps walked, calories burned, tasks completed, emails answered, followers gained.
They become the yardstick not just for effectiveness, but almost for our worth as people.
Underneath it all is this assumption. More is better, faster is better, growth is always the goal.
And it creeps into everything, even leisure. Reading has to be for insights, exercise for optimization, meditation to improve focus for work.
Right. The idea of simply doing nothing becomes incredibly difficult to justify, unless, of course, you frame it as strategic rest for future productivity.
It's a completely different way of valuing human existence compared to, say, contemplative traditions that emphasize presence, just being.
A huge contrast. Those traditions question the core assumption that our value derives primarily from production.
Look at nature, too. A forest isn't trying to maximize quarterly output. The ocean has rhythms.
Exactly. Ecosystems operate in cycles of activity and rest, growth and decay. Seemingly unproductive phases are absolutely essential for health and future flourishing.
And we're part of nature. Presumably, we're designed for similar rhythms.
It seems likely. This relentless push for constant output feels like an aberration, a misalignment with our natural design. And that misalignment causes friction?
The existential cost. Burnout, anxiety, depression, that feeling of emptiness, even when you are achieving things.
Because if your worth is always contingent on the next thing you produce, you live in a state of perpetual insecurity. You're only as good as your last success.
And that insecurity, ironically, fuels the system again.
Absolutely. It drives consumption. Buy the next productivity tool, the next course, the next efficiency hack. Keep striving, keep consuming.
The real tragedy being what? Forgetting something fundamental.
Forgetting our intrinsic worth, that deep down value that exists completely independent of any achievement. We become performers in our own lives, alienated from a core sense of self-acceptance.
Which brings us neatly to identity. Who are we, really? If someone asks, who are you? What's the typical response?
Usually a list of labels, right? Our job title, our relationship status, maybe some personality traits, hobbies.
But where did those labels come from? Did we discover them, or were they kind of assigned? Chosen freely or absorbed?
It starts from birth, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Gender assignment, cultural or religious identities maybe, family expectations, even our names. External forces start shaping our sense of self immediately.
And then we learn pretty quickly which behaviors get rewarded, smiles, praise, and which get rejected.
We start unconsciously molding ourselves into a version that navigates the social world effectively, a socially viable identity, which might sometimes come at the cost of expressing what feels truly authentic deep down.
So there's this societal framework again, this matrix of identity.
You could call it that. A system of norms, expectations, rewards, punishments, all shaping consciousness to function within the social group. And look, some level of this is necessary for societies to cohere.
Sure, we need common ground. But does modern society amplify it?
I think it does, and exploits it in some ways. Think about education again, often rewarding specific cognitive styles over others. Media presents very selective narratives about who is valuable, admirable, cool.
Creating these identity templates that feel natural but are actually constructed.
Right, and social media. It turns identity into a full-blown performance. Curated, edited, optimized for likes and follows. The self becomes content.
And the economic system values certain identities and activities more than others, steering our self-development towards what's marketable.
The cumulative effect is powerful. It can create this deep illusion. The Maya, in some traditions, that this socially constructed self, this collection of roles and beliefs, is the true self.
The authentic self, the core of who we are, gets buried.
Or learns to compromise. It adapts, prioritizes acceptance over authenticity just to get by. This adapted self gets mistaken for our essential nature.
And we become fiercely loyal to it, defending it, organizing our lives around preserving this constructed identity.
Loyal to our own cage, as some might say. This, from a spiritual perspective, is often seen as the core crisis of modernity. Mistaking our conditioned identity for our essential being.
The roles, the beliefs, the history, it all becomes like armor, separating us from what some traditions call our original face.
So the journey becomes one of discernment. Not necessarily rejecting social roles entirely, but seeing them for what they are. Temporary, provisional, useful, maybe, but not the fundamental truth of who we are.
Shifting the question, not just who am I in terms of my roles,
But who am I beyond all identities? What remains when I set aside the job title, the relationship status, the personality traits I've cultivated?
Okay, let's talk about comfort. We're naturally drawn to it, obviously, and modern life, especially technology, seems dedicated to maximizing ease and eliminating friction.
It's presented as pure progress,
Right.
right? Convenience is king. Instant gratification is the norm.
But could there be a downside to making comfort the absolute imperative? A hidden spiritual danger, perhaps?
It's worth considering. When comfort becomes the overriding principle, it can function as an anesthetic for awareness. It can subtly encourage unconsciousness.
Because growth, real growth, often involves some struggle, some challenge.
Exactly. Think about it physically, cognitively, emotionally. We get stronger, smarter, more resilient by facing appropriate levels of difficulty, not by living in a padded room.
Many spiritual traditions actually incorporate discomfort, don't they? Fasting, periods of silence, intense physical practice.
They recognize that certain kinds of awareness only emerge when we temporarily suspend our usual comforts. Discomfort can be a catalyst.
So what happens when we become addicted to comfort? When our tolerance for any discomfort plummets?
We might find ourselves in a narrowing spiral of experience, unable to tolerate silence because we're used to constant stimulation, so we miss the insights silence offers.
Fleeing boredom with endless novelty, missing the creative sparks that can arise from stillness.
Avoiding negative emotions with distractions, preventing ourselves from actually processing them, shielding ourselves from challenging ideas, which calcifies our worldview.
It sounds like a kind of psychological atrophy. We lose the muscle needed to engage with difficulty.
We become more fragile, more dependent on controlled environments. And there's a potential political dimension too, isn't there?
How so?
Well, a population that constantly seeks comfort and avoids discomfort at all costs might be easier to govern, more susceptible to authorities who promise safety, security, and ease.
The modern equivalent of bread and circuses keep people entertained and comfortable, and they might not ask too many difficult questions.
It's a possibility. Unconsciousness can be made very, very comfortable, so comfortable that few might choose otherwise. The comfort imperative acts like a social anesthetic, administered through seduction and pleasure.
So the antidote isn't necessarily seeking out suffering, but
Conscious engagement with necessary discomfort, finding value in things like voluntary simplicity, purposeful challenges.
like creating intentional moments of silence, maybe digital detoxes.
Exactly. Or practicing staying present with uncomfortable feelings instead of immediately distracting ourselves. Engaging with viewpoints that challenge us. Even simple things like occasionally choosing the stairs or embracing a bit of physical exertion.
It's about reframing comfort, seeing it as an occasional gift, maybe, rather than the default expectation that shapes our whole lives.
So it enhances life, rather than diminishing our capacity for consciousness.
You mentioned those quiet moments earlier where a feeling of something missing can surface, a sense of disconnect.
Yes. That subtle background noise of emptiness or just not quite being whole. Some traditions might call this the great forgetting.
Forgetting what exactly?
Our essential nature. Forgetting that spontaneous, curious, fully present state that perhaps feels more natural to us deep down, maybe like when we were very young. It's kind of collective amnesia.
And it happens slowly, right? Through all the compromises, the social conditioning we've talked about, building up the layers of that adaptive personality.
Layer by layer, the shell forms, obscuring the core. The child learns to contain their energy. The mind gets disciplined for linear thought. The heart learns which emotions are acceptable.
Education focusing on information about things rather than direct knowing. Work reinforcing narrow outputs over holistic presence.
And digital technology, arguably, intensifies this with its constant partial attention, pulling us away from embodied experience.
And maybe a lack of meaningful rites of passage or guidance in modern culture that helps us connect with that deeper self.
Without those kinds of initiatory processes, it's easy to live our whole lives mistaking the conditioned self for our true being. We don't even realize there's a difference to recognize.
What are the symptoms of this separation, this forgetting?
We touched on some. The persistent emptiness, even with success. Existential anxiety, compulsive seeking for wealth, status, experiences, information, emotional numbness, a shaky sense of self.
But you also said these symptoms, while painful, can be wake-up calls.
Absolutely. They are signals from our deeper self, nudging us to look closer. The pain is often the catalyst for the journey of remembering.
It feels like the tragedy of the modern mind in a way. We know so much, have access to endless information.
But we can be disconnected from wisdom, from our bodies, from nature, from our own essential core. Knowing the price of everything, perhaps, but the value of nothing truly essential.
And the most insidious part.
Forgetting that we've forgotten. Normalizing the disconnection. Believing that this state of subtle anxiety and fragmentation is the human condition. Like the fish unaware of the water it swims in.
So how do we remember? What's the way back?
It's fundamentally a shift in attention. Turning inward. Creating that silence, that sensory simplicity.
Practicing embodiment. Really feeling our breath, our bodies, maybe through movement or just presence.
Engaging in contemplative inquiry, that who am I beyond question. Spending unstructured time in nature, letting it recalibrate us.
Cultivating relationships where we feel safe enough to be authentic.
It's about recognizing what has always been present beneath the layers, like Michelangelo chipping away the marble to reveal the statue already within. Enlightenment, some say, is not becoming something new, but unbecoming what we are not.
Which leads to this really interesting paradox. Society tells us freedom comes from getting more, doing more, asserting the self.
Right, liberation through acquisition, achievement, self-assertion, build a stronger ego, get what you want.
But so much wisdom, ancient and modern, points in the opposite direction. Freedom through surrender, release, letting go of the ego's grip.
It creates a real dissonance, doesn't it? The strategies society promotes for happiness often seem to intensify our bondage to that separate, striving self.
While the paths that look passive acceptance, surrender, are said to catalyze genuine liberation, it's counterintuitive.
We're steeped in the mythology of more. Fulfillment comes through addition. Buy more stuff, achieve more goals, gather more information, have more experiences.
Which can lead to that hungry ghost state you mentioned, always craving, never truly satisfied because the fulfillment we seek isn't found externally.
Exactly. The wisdom traditions often propose the inverse, the way of decrease. Freedom emerges not through adding, but through subtracting.
Like limiting overwhelming choices to find clarity, releasing rigid identities, discerning signal from noise in the information flood, letting go of expectations.
Yes, even the word decision has roots meaning to cut off. Clarity often comes from eliminating alternatives, not endlessly seeking more options.
And surrender, it sounds passive, maybe weak, but you're suggesting it's an active alignment.
Very active. It's aligning with a deeper reality. Cognitively, it means releasing the relentless need to know and control everything, allowing for mystery. Emotionally, allowing feelings to arise and pass without needing to fight them or become totally identified with them.
And at the ego level,
Releasing the fierce attachment to the sense of being a separate, isolated self, gently letting go of that constant self-referencing.
there's often a fear around that, isn't there? A fear of annihilation if we let go of the ego.
Understandably so. But the experience, as reported by many who tread this path, isn't annihilation but expansion. What dissolves are the limitations, the sense of separation, leading to a feeling of greater connection, presence, and aliveness.
So the big challenge for us living in this modern world is integrating these paradoxes. How do we operate within the structures but stay connected to this deeper reality?
That's the integration journey. How do we live with boundaries while knowing they're provisional? Engage in our roles without being totally defined by them. Use technology without being used by it. Create prosperity without being possessed by it. Form relationships from a place of wholeness, not neediness.
It's that classic phrase, be in the world but not of it.
Exactly. It points towards a radical presence, engaging fully with life while accessing these deeper dimensions of being right here, right now.
So, practically speaking, how do we start? What are some concrete steps towards this kind of awakening in action?
It really starts small. Micro-revolutions in daily awareness. Tiny, deliberate acts of consciousness.
Like what? Give us some examples.
Okay, reclaiming attention. Even just 5 or 10 minutes regularly, completely free from digital input. Just being present. It starts to recondition the attention span away from constant distraction.
Okay. Attention reclamation. What else?
Practicing with small discomforts. Maybe a cool shower finish, intermittent fasting if appropriate, a regular tech Sabbath. Tiny doses to build that muscle of non-reactivity and resilience we talked about.
Identity inquiry on the go.
Yeah, just pausing occasionally during the day and asking, who is experiencing this right now? Who am I beyond this immediate role or feeling?
Consumption consciousness. Pausing before buying something.
Exactly. Asking, is this coming from a genuine need for well-being, or is it a distraction, a conditioned desire and attempt to fill that inner void.
And nature immersion, getting outside, device-free.
Absolutely crucial. Letting the rhythms of the natural world recalibrate us, evoke that sense of expanded awareness, these small practices start to create cracks in the armor of conditioning.
But you mentioned direct experience being key, too, beyond just these practices.
Yes, intellectual understanding is one thing, but transformation often deepens through moments of direct seeing, peak experiences, maybe awakening moments, where the habitual way of perceiving reality just drops away, even briefly.
And those can come through various means.
They can. Contemplative practices like meditation or centering prayer can shift focus from thoughts to pure awareness. Flow states getting lost in creativity or nature, moments of profound, authentic connection with another person where the sense of separation dissolves.
Some traditions use sacred plant medicines, with appropriate guidance, of course.
Yes, used responsibly and with integration support, they can temporarily disrupt the default mode network and offer glimpses beyond ordinary consciousness. Even simple embodied awareness practices, bringing full attention to physical sensation.
The value isn't necessarily the specific trigger, but the revelation itself.
Exactly. The revelation that reality is more vast and mysterious than our conventional perception allows, and that our identity is far more fluid and expansive than our conditioned self.
And doing this alone can be hard, the community aspect.
Hugely important. We humans are social creatures. We calibrate our sense of normal based on those around us. Awakening often requires supportive relational contexts.
Finding or creating a community of practice.
Even a small group. It provides reality confirmation. I'm not crazy for feeling this. Accountability, shared wisdom, and a sense of belonging that transcends our usual conditioned roles. Genuine transformation is rare in isolation. We need these supportive structures.
An awakening isn't a one-time event, is it? It's an ongoing integration.
Absolutely. Bringing those moments of expanded awareness back into ordinary life. Translating insight into ethical action. Navigating the inevitable challenges and complexities, integrating the shadow aspects that arise. It's a lifelong journey.
The goal isn't to escape conventional life, but to infuse it with extraordinary presence.
Beautifully put.
So, if someone starts to awaken, to see beyond these illusions, you used the word dangerous earlier. What does that mean?
Dangerous not in a harmful way, but dangerous to systems that rely on unconsciousness. Dangerous to narratives that require unquestioning belief. Dangerous to power structures built on conformity and fear.
Because that person operates from a different place.
They feed through the games of artificial scarcity. They're less motivated by fear or the need for external validation. They start to experience interconnectedness, moving beyond the purely separate self. They find their worth intrinsically.
This shift in consciousness itself is the real revolution.
Arguably, yes. It's the only true revelation, perhaps. Transforming consciousness is the source from which truly new and more humane structures can emerge.
And seeing clearly doesn't lead to anger or judgment necessarily.
Ideally, it leads to profound compassion. Recognizing that the conditioning is largely inherited, that everyone is doing the best they can from their current level of awareness. Seeing the suffering caused by the illusion of the separate self fosters understanding, not blame.
So anger might transform into a kind of compassionate engagement, wanting everyone to wake up rather than wanting to defeat an enemy.
That's the hope. And releasing attachment to that rigid, conditioned identity also unleashes incredible creativity.
How so?
New ways of thinking, problem solving, communicating, imagining ethical possibilities, renewing culture. It's bringing transcendent awareness into tangible, creative expression in the world.
Could it be that this whole great deception, this period of disconnection, was even necessary somehow from an evolutionary perspective?
Some might argue that. Perhaps it enabled certain kinds of cognitive development, technological progress. But those very advancements have now created global challenges, ecological, social, spiritual, that seem to demand a shift away from that fragmented consciousness towards integration.
So individual awakening isn't just personal, it's part of a potential collective shift.
It contributes to what some call the great work of our time, evolving human consciousness to meet the complexities we've created.
So after all this exploration, it really does seem to circle back to something incredibly simple.
The return to presence, moment by moment, breath by breath, choice by choice.
Bringing attention back here now, to direct experience, embodied reality, the awareness that's noticing it all.
That simple return, practiced consistently, is what gently loosens the knots of conditioning. It softens the identification with the limited self. It weakens the belief in separation.
Not through force, but just through recognition.
Simple, gentle recognition. And this practice isn't hidden away in monasteries. It's available right here, in the middle of ordinary life. All it requires is the willingness to pause just for a moment and notice.
And as that practice deepens, maybe we discover that freedom isn't something out there to be chased.
But it's our original nature. Peace isn't some future achievement, but the cessation of unnecessary struggle right now.
The great deception, then, is believing freedom has to be found or earned externally.
When the radical truth might be that it's already here, inherent in awareness itself.
You are not merely what you've been conditioned to be.
You are the awareness within which all these conditioned thoughts, feelings, and roles appear. Spacious, clear, intrinsically free, and fundamentally undivided from the wholeness of existence.
And knowing that, even glimpsing it, allows for a different way of living. Engaged, authentic, connected.
Informed by wisdom, rooted in genuine connection. Awakening is both profoundly world-changing and utterly ordinary. It's available to everyone.
So the invitation is simply to question the unquestionable.
And remember what was never truly forgotten. That subtle longing you sometimes feel. Perhaps it's just your own authentic nature calling you home.
Thank you. This has been a fascinating deep dive.
Thank you. Always a pleasure to explore these ideas.